you so much, Harry and Reed. Let's play a little clubhouse session and talk to two major shapers of the European VC ecosystem. I'm very happy to introduce Sonali, partner at Excel. She joined the firm in 2008, is responsible for its European expansion, and focuses on consumer internet, software, and fintech businesses. We are also very glad to welcome Sol today, who's not only founding partner of Local Globe and Latitude Ventures, but also co-founder of a dozen successful companies. It's a pleasure to have you both here, and handing over to you now, Harry.
Thanks so much for that, Laura. So I want to start a little bit from the top today. And if we think about the landscape that we're in, I think there's kind of two schools of thought. One is that markets are so expanded that the prices make sense. Another is that, bluntly, there's so much capital and it's concerning. I'd love to hear from your perspective when you take stock of where we are today, and also given the 15 years plus of experience in venture, how you think about where we are today, and I guess which side of school of thought are you on? And I'm kind of putting this out to either of you to start.
Sonali, please.
Well, that's what happens when you're a woman. It's always women first.
No, what happens when someone's smarter than you. So over to you.
So I think, Harry, what I would say is that it is difficult to tell. My view is that Europe is really at a tipping point, right? It's like 20 to 25 cities that have all seen what we've been waiting for. And I've been waiting for as Sol for 20 years, which is the recycling of talent as well as capital. And I've never seen the kind of explosion in terms of the quality of ideas, entrepreneurs across sectors, across geos, and really the depth. You can go to Vilnius, you can go to Tallinn, you can find great ideas. So I think in many ways, this really is the golden age. And yes, it means, and of course, Zoom has democratized everything, which means people can sit on these grids and make investment decisions, as we are hearing a lot. So prices are going up, but my sense is that it's a stable environment, actually. I think Europe is in a special place right now in terms of, especially in sectors that are really booming. I mean, we've seen Europe witness something like 50% of funding in the cloud market is coming from Europe, but only about a third of the unicorns, sorry to use the word, are coming from Europe. So you think about what is the pipeline. So I think we're going to see more of the same as opposed to less of the same. And now, where our prices, et cetera, I think that's a very macro discussion. But at a micro level, it's safe to say that I think there's more to come.
So what are your thoughts, especially on the early stage?
A couple of thoughts. Firstly, absolutely agree with Sonali about, we're at this inflection point. I mean, the phrase that we use a lot is that it's taken 20 years to get to the starting line, and now it gets interesting. And I think, we need to recognize it's taken a long time for the ecosystem in Europe to get to the point that Sonali is mentioning. The second thing, which I think is global macro, is that the shift from public markets to private markets is sort of multi-decade and is massive and is not stopping. There was a great report Morgan Stanley wrote last year about the shift from public to private markets, and there's one sentence in it that really sticks with me, is that a 1% swing in pension fund allocation from public to private markets is the entire US venture industry. So, I mean, I think that's worth considering if we think there's a lot of money in the private markets at the moment. This 1% swing of pension fund allocation is not if, it's when. And so actually there is, a massive wave of more money coming into the private markets. And what I would also point out is that Europe at an absolute level is underweight from a funding perspective. And that's particularly acute, less so at the startup phase, at the sort of the seed Series A phase. But as soon as you get to the breakout phase that we think of, it's underweight, and it's very underweight domestically because it's still a lot of the capital is international. So I think there's a long way to go.
I want to touch on that because I think a big misnomer that we have today is that this hype versus reality around US entering Europe. And a lot's been written about it. I think firms are very good at like marketing themselves around it on the US side and their entry and belief in Europe. But actually, when you look at it, Sequoia have partners on the ground here, Lightspeed have partners on the ground here. There might be one or two others, but not the big firms that we're all well aware of in terms of brand. And actually, you're looking at going, there is a distortion between reality and hype, especially when it comes to decision makers writing checks on the ground, is my perspective. Would you agree with that? And how do you think about this US in London?
I mean, I look, the US have been in London for as long as Accel have been in London, for a start. And obviously, I mean, Sonali can talk more about that, but, that Sequoia, as you said, is here. They have decision makers on the ground and more coming. General Catalyst is here. They have decision makers on the ground. More is coming. Bessemer are here. They have decision makers coming. Lightspeed is here. So,
but honest, I mean,
but yeah, they do. And but again, I think everyone is positioning themselves for the next 20 years. Because I think it goes back to this point about relative to both the US and China, Europe, for all of these incredible waves and the opportunity that Sonali and I are both talking about, there's not enough capital yet in Europe relative to other markets. And, in addition to all of the international capital that's here, is coming and will stay, I believe, there is also going to be a lot more domestic capital because pension funds and insurance companies are saying, hey, we just missed this tech thing in the last 20 years.
So I'm with Harry here. So I think it takes a lot of conviction and commitment to really set up a full organization on the ground and stay the course. I mean, it's not an advertisement. We've been here 21 years. I've been on the ground 21 years like Sol. And I've seen it come and go. And do I think it's here to stay? Yes, I do think, Harry, that is where I agree with Sol. But I think building an organization where you can really match the capillary network that Europe represents in terms of the 20, 25, 30 hub city clusters, be there with the first generation, second generation, third generation, be there across all the sectors. So you're not just sort of in certain verticals. This takes a lot of time and a lot of infrastructure and a lot of organizational prowess. It's not clear to me how the organizations are going to set up for success because you need the check writers, you need the teams, and you need the feet on the street. And I think things are going to go back to a very different place post the pandemic. But at the same time, Zoom is not going to replace the interactions. It's just not going to happen. I see the way everyone's going back to in-person walks and talks, in-person meetings, people trying to travel if they can. So my sense is the organizations that one is going to need to really make Europe a priority as opposed to do the sort of, the best deals they can see at any given point in time is going to look different to what it is today. So Harry, I'm with you.
Yeah. I mean, that I totally agree with, and I mean, to be fair, Accel are really the only people who came, stayed, and built a real organization.
Can I actually both speak about building real organizations there? And it's something, I'm lucky to knowing like Suzanne Ashman and George on your team, Saul, knowing Julian intimately well on your team, Sonali. When you think about nurturing the next generation of talent, it's a very difficult thing, but it's something that both of you clearly done incredibly well at and honed as a craft. What does it take to really nurture that talent in a way that allows them to have full ownership and develop on their own merits and rights, but also learn in the apprenticeship style model that we hear venture is kind of so good for doing?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we probably don't have enough time for that question to be fully answered. It's we've been 38 years in business, and we do this in Palo Alto, we do this in London, we do this in Bangalore too. If you walk into any offices, culturally, it's almost the same or similar, which is kind of shocking. So it's sort of part of the DNA, which is why I mentioned that, and I do think Saul's one of the other protagonists has done a fabulous job in the industry. So you said it right. I think it's about a few things. People can only be the best version of themselves. So you really have to set up an environment where people can genuinely be themselves. And really exercise their voice before they can exercise their vote and their checkbook. So you have to have a place where people can voice their opinions, where it is diversity of thought, diversity of background in terms of where people come from. And it is really open in terms of you can say what you feel and it's intellectually honest. And then you have to play for the long term. This does not happen in 2-3 years. And, you know, one of my sort of fears right now, Harry, is everything is up to the right. I mean, if Saul and I went to the various books we could write about all the disaster situations we've been through, you know, unfortunately, you know, it would take many of our podcast sessions, and there's been a lot of learning along the way. And right now, things just look so good, and things look so great, and valuations go up. I think there's a lot of learning that's not being given right now in this current environment. But I think if you stick around a long enough time, and I think you really focus on how do you harness the best versions of what you can do well in terms of how you think about entrepreneurs, how you think about markets, how you can sort of spot when something's working, but then you learn and complement that with the right team around you. That's the best formula we have.
Sonali, can I just ask one thing on that? You know, you spoke about kind of freedom of voice before vote, and I totally agree with you there. How do you create an environment of safety where more junior members of the team do feel like they can truly express their opinion in a non-judgmental, non-pressurized environment and be happy to do so? Because that's really tough to do.
No, you're right, and I'm sure no one does it perfectly, and I'm sure we've also had to, and I know we've had to learn around, you know, across the way. What I would say is that it's all about also the one-on-one. You really need to have the more experienced members want to spend time with the younger people. So there has to be that fit. And that's the only way to create that safety, where you give the nurturing and the mentoring more on a one-to-one basis, and in the group basis that you hope that the organization kind of evolves and works, if that makes sense. But that one-on-one is invaluable in this industry. So you have to have people interested in mentoring. And I think that's what happens in a lot of the other organizations. People are not interested in mentoring. It's a star culture. It's all about what deal can you get me? It's transactional. And as a result, these firms don't build legacies. They build great investment teams and great investments and great deals, but it's a transactional business. We're not in the business of building a transactional business. We're really in the business. We've been handed over something by our founders, who are still around, by the way. And the goal is to hand it to the next generation and the next generation.
I mean, you know, it's just such a fascinating topic. And I know we've been talking about this on and off for years, Harry. And I mean, first of all, I would say, you know, we're all still learning here. I know that there is a paper that Josh Lerner at Harvard Business School, who's kind of probably one of the kind of preeminent, at least academic thinkers on venture, is putting together around transitions in venture capital and how that's well managed. And, you know, as Sonali said, the number of legacy organizations, if you like, that exist within venture, you could probably, you know, hold on one hand, maybe. It's incredibly challenging to do. And I think, you know, the main conclusion from the draft of the paper I've seen is that there is no process currently, and there is no best practice, you know, because we're still in a very young industry. I mean, you know, although 9 out of the 10 largest companies in the world are venture-backed, didn't exist 40 years ago, and were all run by their founders, you know, this is still an incredibly young industry. It's 50, 60 years old. And, you know, it plays out, as Sonali said, over decades. So I guess from my perspective, and I've been very lucky, you know, I think, you know, like Sonali, I've learned from some great people, you know, I've had some great partners over the years, you know, both at Index, you know, Reshma at Seed Camp. You know, you learn from the co-investors that you work with. I've been on boards with Sonali, I've been on boards with Fergal from Highland, you know, with George Coelho, who I'm sure, you know, Sonali and I were all smiling, you know, when he was at Benchmark Europe. And, you know, you're just learning the whole time. And I think, I mean, you are the ultimate example of this, you know, not only being a learning machine, but also, you know, creating a vehicle for the industry to learn, which is, you know, amazing as well. but for me, it all comes back down to values, and building a firm around a very, very clear set of values, that are not only clear to the team, but are clear to all of the stakeholders that you're working with, founders, your co-investors, and as Doug Leone would call them, your clients, the people who invest in your business, the LPs. And I think, it begins and ends with values. And, some of our values are around, taking a long-term view, being good neighbors, to the community that we exist within, our local neighborhoods, our ecosystem, the founders that we work with. And then I think, everything that Sonali said is brilliant. I love this notion of the voice before the vote, but it's really hard to do this stuff right. And I mean, I've been doing this for 15, 20 years now, and, you learn something new every week, mostly every day, quite frankly.
I'm totally with you, especially at seed, when you bluntly have to sometimes move a little bit faster. I think one thing I do really want to touch on, Sonali, you said everything looks great today, and it's a challenge for maybe younger or newer entrants into the market when everything is so marked up so fast. How do you advise companies on preemptive rounds? Because I'm stuck in the dilemma of, you're not ready for that Series B, but your competitor will take it and they could kill us if they have 100 million more. And so how do you think about advising companies on whether or not to take the preemptive round and whether that's right? I know it's so company specific, but
no, and it's a really good question. I think by and large, if you're on the field, and because I'm not into sports, sorry, I don't know what analogy to give you. You got to play the game. You can't play a different game. If everyone is playing football, you just can't play rugby. Those are different games, right? And I think that you're spot on. If your competitor is going to take that, that round, is going to announce itself a category leader, it's going to then hire the next 3 killer execs, because it's sort of, it's all about the persona. Unfortunately, these things have a self-fulfilling destiny that's attached to them. So I would say largely we're of the view right now, if you can take the money and it makes sense, and at some point you're going to grow into it, and that is a question, because people are paying forward and then it's being preempted to pay forward again. At some point, I think I have a sense the preemption levels are coming down. So at some point, people are not 4 years forward. There is some sanity to it. But generally, we're saying take it. That said, I think we're also doing that, Harry, in cases where we feel there's quite a robust framework in terms of company operations. There's real thoughtfulness in terms of how much do we burn, where's the CAC, because you can take the capital, but if you also spend it the wrong way, then it's burning and not investing. And the distinction between the two is now very obvious to most founders. Have become very sophisticated. So I think as long as we can have those conversations around budgets and burns, and it's really the founders who are driving it and they're doing it in the right framework, I think it's okay.
My question is then, bluntly, because you're right, you have to play the game on the field, but you also do at some point have to have some sensitivity towards price. How do you determine between when to pay up versus when not to? What is that kind of difference or intersection between it's uncomfortable whereas it's not possible?
I mean, my take on this, and I still think like this. We thought like this at Index, and I think it's talked to a lot of people about this. Is it depends what you think of as early, and it depends what you think of as late. And you want to. My view is that we're in the business of figuring out what early is, and sometimes early can look late to a lot of other people. So for example, you could sell out of Shopify or Twilio when your lockup expires, and you've just passed on a 20 or an 80x in the public markets. So is that too late? You can buy secondary in a $4 billion pre-IPO round in Facebook and think, oh, that's only going to be a 2 to 3x, which is, how we thought about it when we debated long and hard at Index. We weren't lucky enough, like Axel, to get into the Series A. And, it ended up being a 20 to 25x. But at the same time, you need to put guardrails around how you think about capital allocation. And there's some really, there's great work and great thinking there. And often, people, I think, don't talk enough about the role that great LPs can play in a fund. We've learned a lot, I think, probably both of us, from folks like Horsley Bridge over the years about, okay, go long, but, maybe don't go more than 5 or 6% of your fund, because then returns might start decaying.
So, being aware of your timing, I know you've got to run now. Sonali, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions one-to-one, just being aware?
Oh Lord, okay, sure.
Terrifying, I know. Does that work?
Yeah, of course. See you, Saul. Thank you.
Thanks, Saul.
See you guys. Thanks a lot.
Can I ask you mentioned there about kind of having that transparency with the founder, especially at the board level. When you think about what it takes to get to that stage,
yes,
what do you find works in terms of building that true relationship of trust and authenticity? Is it kind of showing vulnerability yourself and opening up to who you are and kind of engendering the same in them? How do you think about building that relationship of trust with the founder?
Yeah, so I'm all about being the best version of yourself, which means being yourself and being incredibly authentic. And I think you do this amazingly, right? I mean, you do this even in the public sphere. I don't quite know how to do that yet, but I think you have to be vulnerable, because if, at about anything, about work, about life, about health, about, experiences, and otherwise, how do you expect somebody else to? And I think, this has probably been one of the great bonuses for me as a woman. I found that much easier to do than maybe the next person, or at least it's the personality. So I do think that's one of the answers. The other one is, you celebrate the highs, but you sort of also celebrate the learning in the lows. You do not freak out when an entrepreneur, goes through a tough time. They got something very wrong, a hire wrong, they missed their numbers dramatically. As long as you still believe in the premise, and you still believe in the business, and you still believe in the person, which you really should do if you invested, with the right level and robustness of thinking, then honestly, it doesn't matter. It's a blip, or it's a bump, or it's a pothole, call it what you will, or it's a diversion you need to go right. But I think that conversation when things don't go well is so critical. And that's what allows you to build that trust, because at some point it doesn't go well, right? And you have to have the conversation. So to me, those are very, very important inflection points in a relationship.
Can I ask one final question? When you look at your role today with Excel, what's the hardest thing? What continuously keeps you up at night, or is it persistent? We really need to work on this. This concerns me. How do you think about that hardest challenge for you?
Yeah, so I think there's a personal and there's an institutional. I think at a personal level, the biggest challenge is, and again, I don't know how you do it, but you could always be reading more. You could always be spending more time with your founders. You could be spending more time in the companies. You could be chasing more companies. You could be spending more time with new founders that you want to back. It is infinite, the amount of time and effort and work you can, and, because it's also fun, you can put into this business, but, time isn't infinite, unfortunately. So there's always this feeling of I'm not doing enough. And as an alpha, personality and type A and all of that, it's very difficult on a daily basis. You're like, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, as opposed to what you did do. So that's my personal challenge. If you have any tips or books, because you're a fount of knowledge, please help me.
Do you know what? There is something there actually. It's that I was with my therapist the other day, and so I've been very open about eating disorders and actually drinking before. And I said to my therapist, it's very difficult with people recovering from an eating disorder, how they engage with exercise, because there's a fine line between passionate and loving running, and then obsessive and compulsive relationship towards it. And I said, I'm really wide, I'm compulsively running. How should I think about this? And he said, you've gone from bluntly being bulimic and having real problems with eating disorders to running a mile or two too far. The advice I give to you is, Harry, and this is what I'm kind of leading to the advice here, give yourself a little bit of a break. You're doing great. Like, actually, it's pretty good. You've made killer investments, Sonali. You have great relationships with your teammates, with your partners, with everyone in the organization. You're doing great. Just like, it doesn't matter if you don't read that extra article. It doesn't.
I'm going to call you every Friday night. So thank you for that. I think at an institutional level, I've seen more change, at least in the European market, in the last 18 months than I saw in the decade before that. So making sure that you're always thinking about the entrepreneur, putting the entrepreneur first, no matter where they are, what they're thinking. They maybe not even an entrepreneur yet, but do they know about Excel? And so do we have a way to build that capillary network to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation who are getting younger and younger? And so just making sure you think of yourself as a very dynamic, very porous organization to constantly have to reinvent. And I'm sure we're doing, 100 things wrong, but hopefully we're doing a few right. That reinvention is what keeps me awake. Just always making sure that we're, if not with the market, maybe even a little bit ahead, and we don't always get it right. But you have to be paranoid in order to survive.
Last one. How do you think about your personal brand? You said there about kind of entrepreneurs getting younger and younger, decentralization of entrepreneurship. I think of it like a shop sign. Like, how do I make my shop sign the biggest? And that's what a brand is. Yeah. How do you think about your personal brand?
Okay, Harry, the truth is I don't.
No, it's totally...
I live and breathe for the firm and the team. And you want me to be honest? I really believe in the institution and doing the right thing. And if you do the right thing consistently over decades and decades, everybody benefits. And it's about Excel first and team first. It's about entrepreneur first. And then we're in the back seat, and hopefully it's about the team first. I'm sorry, I know that's not the way the market has evolved to, but it's really who I am. So
I love that as an answer. That's brilliant. But listen, Sonali, thank you so much for joining me. Saul, thank you so much for doing this with us. And this has been such a pleasure to do.
Thank you, Harry. What a pleasure. Thank you, team.